Hey everyone, before this video begins, I just wanted to take a second and tell you all that I've opened up a cash app for the channel called Riku Zero, which you can find a link to in the description below. I really love making these videos, connecting with you guys in the comment section, and I'd like to keep that up. Thank you for your continued support, and now, on with the video. Have you ever played an amazing game that managed to deliver on all fronts, except for one specific aspect which caused you to label it as near perfect? As a fan of action games, I have a ton of titles I can describe as near perfect. My examples being Kingdom Hearts 3 and Astral Chain, both of which have amazing visuals, gameplay, and music, but falter in the storytelling, either not having enough meat on the bones, or is kind of all over the place in what it's trying to say. While I got my grievances with both of these games, that doesn't stop me from loving them fondly, and for spending an ungodly amount of time playing them. Seriously, how did I spend over 100 hours playing Astral Chain? It's a 20-hour game! In any case, today I get to add another game to the near-perfect pile, being Yakuza 4. Now, similarly to the games I mentioned above, 4 is firing on all cylinders in terms of gameplay, music, and visuals, making for one hell of an experience despite its age. But then we get to the ending, where truths are being revealed and twists and turns are happening by the second, and it's just a lot to swallow within the last hours of the game. It also doesn't help that I feel 4 had a pretty good villain that got dealt with way too early, and the villains who replaced him just didn't hold the same kind of flair as him. It sucks that 4 couldn't be solid all the way through to the end, but despite that, 4 is a really strong entry into the series, which is saying something considering that all of these games are already incredibly strong to begin with. How does 4 do it? Well, strap right in, because we're diving right into it. Our story starts out in Kamurocho, where surprisingly we aren't following Kiryu, but a moneylender named Shun Akiyama, also known as the lifeline of Kamurocho, thanks to his loan office that doesn't charge interest no matter the loan they give out. While this may sound fantastic, there is a catch though, as to get the loan, the person must first pass a test that Akiyama has set up for them, with the difficulty of the test depending on how much they ask for. Interestingly enough, Akiyama has never once had a repeat customer, as everyone who took a loan from him never came back. Which may sound bad, but it's actually a good thing, as Akiyama's whole goal behind his loan office is to set up his customers with a new life where they don't need money to achieve their goals. Anyways, this high-profile financial savior is spending his afternoons lazing around in his disgusting office reading about a string of murders going on in Kamurocho, as he then gets a phone call from his secretary Hana, chewing him out for bumming around and not running collections. Akiyama reluctantly listens to her, only to get sidetracked 5 minutes into his run when he notices an acquaintance of his run into the Kanemura family office in a hurry. The man in question is named Kido, and the reason he's so frazzled is thanks to 2 Yakuza from the Ueno-Seiwa clan who are out partying in their family's club. While it doesn't sound so bad on the surface, Kido explains to his lackey, who just doesn't get it, that it's all about respect. And simply put, you wouldn't pop your head into another family's club unless you were trying to say that they aren't worth fearing. Akiyama then pops his head in for a minute, only to be quickly shooed away, as thanks to the Ueno-Seiwa, the Kanemura family have to figure out how to handle the situation without starting a war. Ultimately, the Kanemura family decide to send their top officer, Arai, to handle the situation, but to their surprise, Akiyama deals with the Ueno-Seiwa punks, trying to avoid another Yakuza war by having a civilian clean up the mess. It doesn't take long after the fight ends for Arai to arrive, and once he does, things get hairy fast, as the conscious Ueno-Seiwa member pulls out a gun. Arai tries to defuse the situation peacefully, only to get shot for his troubles, giving the Ueno-Seiwa punks time to escape. As Akiyama and Kido check on Arai, he says that the bullet only grazed him despite his suit telling a different story, and tells Kido to go after them, but to be careful and not do anything stupid. As Arai hobbles off, Akiyama goes his own way until he gets a phone call from Hana saying that 2 guys just ran into the alleyway behind their office and one of them was carrying a gun. Akiyama wastes no time in sprinting over, only to hear a gun go off, and when he goes to check the alleyway, he sees Arai standing over the dead body of the Ueno-Seiwa member who shot him. Akiyama stares at the sight in complete disbelief. In fact, he's so damn shocked that he doesn't stop Arai when he runs away. Instead, he just continues to stare, which is unfortunate as cops surround the area quickly, arresting him on sight, seeing as he was the only person around a fresh corpse. After being released thanks to Hana testifying his innocence, a detective named Sugauchi stops Akiyama before he leaves the station, telling him not to get involved with the Kanemura family anymore. Akiyama explicitly ignores him, as in the middle of one of his customer interviews with a very suspicious lady named named Lily who asks him to lend her over 100 million yen with no collateral, Akiyama gets a call from Kido telling him to come to the rooftop of Theater Square so that they can discuss what happened last night. When Akiyama arrives at Theater Square, Kido tells him that Kanemura had been murdered around the same time Akiyama got arrested in Arai's place. But before they can get anywhere else, the Shibata family, the parent family to the Kanemura, arrived looking to have a long chat with Akiyama and Kido. Akiyama then fends off the Shibata while Kido makes a break for it, only to find that the cops are looking for him again, and not wanting to spend another night in jail, he bounces, only to find them right outside his doorstep. Once again, Suguuchi approaches Akiyama, this time telling him that he'll be under protective watch, as thanks to the murder of that one Uenosewa punk, it managed to create a domino effect that is now troubling the upper brass of the Tojo clan. Long story short, that punk that I murdered was supposed to be promoted to lieutenant of the Uenosewa, and now with him out of the picture, the family will be hurting without his support. So, as a fair trade, the captain of the Uenosewa, Katsuragi, asks Daigo to either bring them the head of Arai, or to give them control of Majima's construction site, Kamurocho Hills. Now, if you remember, in 3, the Tojo clan was in a money crisis, and in 4, that problem still hasn't been solved yet. In fact, thanks to Tojo clan's biggest breadwinner Mine dying as of last game, they no longer have a stable source of income. However, if Kamurocho Hills can be completed, then their financial drought would be over and Daigo can finally support his clan of 30,000 men without worry. So with that being said, it's pretty easy to guess which one of the two choices Daigo would end up going with. As such, the cops are looking to head off Arai at any possible pass, which means keeping an eye out on all the people Arai is closest to. After the explanation, Akiyama questions why Suguuchi specifically is going to such lengths for a job that should be out of his wheelhouse, which gets Suguuchi to question that as well, but he never answers Akiyama, instead deciding to leave. As Suguuchi leaves, Lily arrives back for her test, as since the loan she asked for was so big, Akiyama needed time to think of an appropriate test. And by test, I mean date, as Akiyama takes her shopping around town, and by date, I actually mean test, as he later sets her up in his cabaret club to make 3 million yen in just 3 days. And with literally no other option available to her, Lily agrees. This is the introduction to the cabaret club. However, since it functions more or less the exact same as the one in 3, I'm going to nix talking about it so I don't have to repeat myself. For the next few days, as Lily steadily earns the 3 million yen, she ends up getting a lot closer to Akiyama, which has her catch the wrong side of Shibata's men who are still looking to have that conversation with Akiyama. While all that goes down in the foreground, Akiyama has Kido come over to tell him what Suguuchi mentioned to him about the Uenosewa situation. Akiyama then gives Kido a large sum of cash and tells him to use it to find that eye and help him skip town. However, Kido refuses to take the money until he finds out why Akiyama is so hell-bent on helping out Arai. And after a lot of prying, Akiyama reveals that back in early 05, he used to work for a bank. That is, until he got framed for an embezzlement scheme. Knowing that he was set up, Akiyama spent every last yen he had trying to prove his innocence, but to no avail, and to a lesser extent lost his girlfriend along the way. But thanks to the ending of Yakuza 1 where Nishikiyama blew himself and Jingu up in the vault, scattering the 100 million to the winds, Akiyama would be fortunate enough to be at the foot of Millennium Tower when the money was raining down. However, a homeless man with money is just an easy target for shady types, or at least it would have been if Arai didn't step in to help him protect his money. Ever since then, Akiyama has been in Arai's corner, believing that one day he would be the next Dragon of Dojima, someone who, despite being a Yakuza, would end up saving Kamurocho from whatever Yakuza problem would befall it. And despite witnessing Arai murder someone, he still believes that now. Satisfied with the explanation, Kido takes the money and leaves to find Arai. The next day, as Akiyama makes another collection run, he comes across a club Lily mentioned she used to work for called Drama Queen. However, he's told by one of the workers of Drama Queen that it's a cross-dressing bar. Confused by what he was just told, Akiyama walks into the bar to confirm it, only to be greeted with the smell of blood, and upon further inspection, a dead body covered in lipstick. Knowing full well what all this means, Akiyama doubles back to his office to find it in shambles with Hana on the floor. As Hana comes to, she tells Akiyama that some thugs muscled in here and took Akiyama's client registry and dragged Kido off without a fight. Akiyama stares at Hana as if she's speaking a second language, but Hana quickly conks him out of it and gets him to run after Kido, who's being held in a homeless camp in Kamurocho's underground mall. After fighting off the thugs, one of which pulled out a chainsaw and still lost, Akiyama asked their leader why they were so interested in the registry, to which he replies it's because they were looking for Lily. The next day, as Lily has finally reached the 3 million yen, Akiyama meets her on top of Millennium Tower with the 100 million yen he promised. However, before he gives it to her, he asks why she killed Kanemura, that guy and drama queen, and what's her problem with the Shibata family in general, as Akiyama pieces together that those goons from earlier were after Lily the whole time. Lily tries to play dumb, but Akiyama says that if she talks, she won't have to pay any of the money back. But Lily takes the cash, saying that she'll pay the 100 million back in full. Akiyama then lets her go, his love for her being too strong to even consider calling the police. After handing Lily her money, Akiyama makes his way back to Sky Finance, where Hana asks him if he gave her the 100 million yen, and when Akiyama tells her yes, she bounces, causing Akiyama to chase after her. When Akiyama catches up to her and asks why she did that, Hana answers him by saying it's because he's giving Lily special treatment because she looks like his ex-girlfriend, and was purposely missing all the red flags she was giving off. Akiyama gets defensive at that comment, telling Hana that while he may have some baggage, to leave his ex out of this. As the two reach an awkward impasse, Hana decides to leave Sky Finance, looking to find herself as well as sort out her feelings for Akiyama in the meanwhile. With Hana gone, Akiyama then gets a call from his club's manager, telling him that the Majima family have just barged into the place looking for Lily. As Akiyama tries to show them the door, Majima himself appears, looking about as downtrodden as he was in Zero. When Akiyama asks why he's after Lily, he responds by saying he's trying to make up for his mistake back in 85. From here, the mystery gets more and more complicated, as Akiyama will need the help of a death row inmate, the parasite of Kamurocho, and the dragon of Dojima to put whatever's brewing in Kamurocho to rest. This is not actually when the game opens up, but introduces us to one of Ford's biggest features being multiple playable characters. First up is Akiyama, who serves as Ford's speed character, dealing damage with kicks and specializing in evasive moves. What makes Akiyama unique though is that not only is he quick on his feet, but he also has the fastest heat generation thanks to context-sensitive taunts, which all generate a considerable amount of heat. As a result, if Akiyama twitches, he'll drown in heat, but to offset this, his pool of heat actions are pretty limited, either requiring an environmental object or a certain amount of thugs to perform any of his more flashy or damaging moves. It should also be noted that out of all the new characters, Akiyama controls the most like Kiryu, being the only other character who has access to the quick step cancel, and even comes with his own version of Tiger Drop, which has to be unlocked via the soul point system, but more on that later. The next character up to bat is Saejima, the resident powerhouse of the game. Now, despite having the smallest pool of combos, Saejima makes up for this with his chargeable attacks, as he can flat out erase health bars with a single combo. However, in exchange for damage, Saejima can't use the quick step at all. Instead, he has this dodge move which does its job, but in comparison to the quick step, it's a notable downgrade, as in terms of positioning, it lands you a good distance away from the opponent, which can lead you to miss some punish opportunities. As such, with Saejima, you're going to be trading your health bar for your opponents, which is simple enough seeing as he is the character with the largest amount of health in the game, and on top of that, all of his charge moves have armor frames on them, allowing him to beat out almost any attack in the game. You know, it's kind of funny, but when I first finished playing 4, I viewed Saejima as the character I had the least amount of fun playing, since I couldn't help but view him as Beast style with significantly less tools to play around with. But when recording footage for this video, I decided to actually dust my brain off and get experimental with Saejima's toolkit, and as it turns out, he has a bit more to offer in the way of custom combos, thanks to him having access to a ground bounce. While I haven't found much as of writing this, I did manage to put together this combo, which probably doesn't work on bosses given how mobile they are, but it's pretty cool. And while not intentional, the possibility of coming up with more did make Saejima's section way more fun to play. It also helped that Saejima's heat actions had the most unique requirements to activate, like combo someone into a wall or ground bounce them, which not only encouraged more experimentation with him to see the various ways I can activate these heat actions, but also gave the best payoffs to any heat action in the series to date with how absurdly brutal they all are. I've certainly gained a lot more appreciation for his gameplay style through making this video, and have had a lot more fun playing him as well. The next character is Tanemura, the technical character of the cast, starting out as honestly the worst controlling member of the 4 due to how slow his combo strings start off as. Because of this, I'd say with Tanemura, the combo upgrade speed is almost mandatory as your first upgrade, just so you can catch him up to where the others are. But once you do that, Tanemura It's still pretty slow, but it becomes a lot more fun in the meanwhile. The most unique aspect of Tanimura is that, unlike the other three who have a block button, Tanimura has a parry button activated by pressing L1. Now, because his parry is mapped to a single button, it can't be as strong as the Komaki parry, as it won't parry every attack, forcing Tanimura to block in certain instances. However, Tanimura's parry still manages to stand apart by itself, as it's the only move in the game that won't lose to behind the back attacks, which are normally a free combo sentence in these games. On top of that, Tanimura has an excessive amount of heat actions for all kinds of scenarios, some of which take perfectly healthy enemies out of the battle immediately or put them into his very own grab stands, which I haven't really found anything cool about this yet, but it can be used to create space between you and the opponents, so that's nice. To offset all of this, Tanimura has the slowest heat generation in the game, so you're really gonna have to pick and choose your spots on when to use heat and when to conserve it, because if you try to play like any other character, you're going to be finding Tanimura on the floor a lot in tougher situations. And last but certainly not least is Kiryu, who surprisingly starts out with some of his moves already unlocked. It doesn't happen often in games, but when an old established character returns in a sequel title and some of their iconic moves are unlocked from the get-go, it's really something else. It feels that gameplay wise, the character has genuinely grown from their last adventure, and also serves as a neat gameplay reminder of how strong that character is this time around. Honestly, I wish that this was something that happened more often in video games. I know it's harder to create a feeling of progression that way, but if they cleverly design around it, i.e. making new characters who are learning the ropes, then there shouldn't be any issue. Anyways, outside of that, Kiryu doesn't control all that differently from his incarnation in 3, aside from the lock-on being tightened up as a whole, alleviating the player from any counterattack mishaps. With that being said, something did change about Kiryu, or more specifically the system around him and how heat upgrades are doled out, in which case you no longer have the ability to upgrade your heat gauge, as the game will instead add more bars to it every other level up or so. This may sound bad at first, but it's actually a great change, as with a more limited heat gauge, it means that you have regular access to red heat. I still stand by what I said in my Yakuza 3 retrospective that red heat doesn't add that much to gameplay, but it feels really nice to casually land red heat actions in random street fights instead of charging it up for God knows how long, only to use it once. It should also be noted that certain heat actions in 4 have follow-up attacks that will take whatever your remaining heat is to dole out more damage. The only catch is that to get these follow-up attacks, 4 requires that you use certain heat actions a specific amount of times, which isn't too big a deal in the grand scheme of things, but it can definitely make obtaining some of these follow-up attacks feel a bit grindy. That aside, while the game doesn't allow you to choose how much heat you get, or health for that matter, it does allow you to choose upgrades as per usual, but 4 probably has the best upgrade system in the series, known as soul points. Sure, and to the point, every time you level up in 4, you're awarded 3 soul points, acting as your upgrade currency. However, from the very start of the game, you can get just about any upgrade you want, the trade-off being that stronger moves require more soul points, so you have to decide if you want one really powerful move, or a bunch of smaller moves that help you out in different instances. There are some restrictions, mind you, as some upgrades require that you spend 4 soul points on them, and others are gated off until you reach a specific level. Although, with that being said, these restrictions don't stop you from going ham with the upgrades and pimping out your characters with some of their strongest moves early on, which in retrospect is kind of a necessity, seeing as each protagonist begins their section at level 1, but despite that, the game continues to get harder and will put out boss fights that assume you've upgraded a handful of strong moves already. The soul point system is such an astronomical overhaul from the upgrade system in 3 that I'm honestly blown away that 4 is the very next game in the lineup. In fact, I'd go beyond that and say that soul points are mechanically my favorite upgrade system in a Yakuza game. Thematically, Zero still has it beat, but soul points are just so freeform in terms of what you can get. Hell, it's so good it caused me to use the word astronomical to describe it. Another thing I describe as astronomical is how much attention is given to each new character's personality, from their idle animations to their dialogue to the fact that some of them will even refuse to do some minigames depending on what kind of person they are. And because of their strong personalities, it can lead to some disappointing results. God. damn it, Saejima, I don't care what you like. Get in that karaoke bar and sing! Honestly, man, you act like there's something to be afraid about letting others hear your voice.
Riku, I'm sorry if I just broke your...
Second thought, you might have a point. But anyways, all three of the new protagonists manage to stand out in their own way and make their playable sections enjoyable. Although, I gotta say, some of the characters shine brighter than others, as, in my opinion, Akiyama is the best out of the three new protagonists. He just has that kind of charisma to make just about anything he does super fun to watch, whether he's succumbing to his chronic laziness or helping people achieve their dreams. With that being said, I also wouldn't mind seeing Akiyama take the leading role in his own game series. Maybe that's not the best idea, as shown with many Western shows in the past and present, that making the quote-unquote best character the protagonist seems to lose the original charm of the series. But given how talented the writers of Yakuza are, I'm sure they managed to pull it off. Now, that's not to say that the other two are bad per se, they just don't have the same kind of charisma as Akiyama. This includes Saejima, who, despite getting my hopes up thanks to him being mentioned in Zero, he didn't exactly blow me away. He isn't too complicated, being a caveman out of his era, and talks about how things used to be back in the day. Most of his dialogue is about his honor as a Yakuza, teaching youngins to keep their words, or telling Yakuza to respect their heavies. Again, there is nothing bad about any of this, but it's also not too captivating either. In fact, it's very standard for a character like him. However, Saejima does have his moments, and we will get to that later. However, he also has his off moments, which I don't think YouTube will allow me to talk about it, so I'm just not gonna poke that sleeping bear. I will say though, to the surprise of no one, that I didn't like that scene, and I think they could have made a scene to show how out of it Saejima was with the outside world a lot more tasteful. Tanemura, on the other hand, I think comes off as the weakest of the three, at least as far as the story goes. If you want anything more than justice out of Tanemura, then the sub-stories are where he's truly given his chance to shine, and live up to the title of Parasite, as it's shown that Tanemura is a borderline gambling addict who'll do just about any task so long as he's promised a big payout. And on top of that, he demonstrates an amazing reluctance to do his own job as a cop and arrest criminals because he hates paperwork. But underneath all of that grime is a good heart, as he's always down to help someone, he just hates paperwork. Hell, he even ends up bringing his gambling earnings back to a place called Little China, which is, for lack of a better term, a home for Asian children whose parents got deported, or for immigrants in general, giving them a place to rest their heads. Now, unlike almost all other Yakuza games which give a different part of Japan to explore alongside Kamurocho, 4 only has Kamurocho in its corner. However, it did give the city new bells and whistles to play around with, in the form of construction platforms connecting the rooftops together, and the new underground mall and parking lot to explore. All in all, it ain't much when looking at it in a general sense. However, when we talk about individual characters, that's when this version of Kamurocho becomes much more interesting. Similarly to what I mentioned earlier, 4 spends a lot of time characterizing its characters via animations and dialogue, but it also does this through what each character has access to or will encounter in the overworld. For instance, Akiyama has no problems traveling through Kamurocho, with the exception being Little China, which is guarded off from him, and since he owns his own cabaret club, he is the only character in the game who can run it. Saejima, on the other hand, being a death row convict, is constantly on the lookout for cops, which, if he encounters any, he will immediately start up the chase minigame, where he has to outrun said cop for a small period of time. As a result, how you traverse in Saejima's sections can change at a moment's notice depending on where the cops are, and sometimes you'll need to traverse through the sewers to get where you need to go. In theory. In practice, these cops have the same eyesight as the Genome soldiers from Metal Gear Solid 1, so you can easily run past them, no harm no foul. Tanemura, on the other hand, being a cop, will get dispatch calls to stop crimes currently in progress, which you can choose to interact with or not. He's also the only character that has access to Little China regularly, which doesn't mean a whole lot since the landmark is just that, a landmark. And finally, we have Kiryu with his main character privilege giving him access to all locations on the map. However, he is more likely to be challenged in a street fight thanks to his reputation as the strongest man in Kamurocho. It's not much, but I do enjoy the small changes they made to each character to make traversing as them feel all the more different. Moving on to the minigames, 4, interestingly enough, makes a handful of improvements on already existing minigames, such as the sprint minigame getting a new dash command which allows you to circumvent tight turns while also helping you keep up your speed, a projectile option which whenever you run over bottles in the street will allow you to hit your targets from afar, albeit you have to be lined up with them, and a QTE because because it looks cool. It should be noted that 4 uses the sprint minigame a lot less than 3, as now these segments are a lot shorter and don't appear in many sub-stories. That is, unless you're Tanimura, who gets dispatch calls, which have the chance to be a sprint minigame, but even then it feels like the dispatch calls are more skewed towards regular fights. As for new minigames, there wasn't much that caught my attention. Aside from a ping pong minigame where you stare at a woman's breast to gain the power to defeat her, and the new arcade game called Boxialis 2, which is a futuristic space shooter that has a visual design that's so off the hook I couldn't put it down when I first booted it up. Although, there is however one new dojo minigame given to Saejima by a man named Sodachi that interested me for a reason I didn't see coming. The dojo is primarily a friendship manager, for lack of a better term, where on top of giving your students lessons and helping them improve their power, speed, and technique, you also have to build a relationship with them in order for them to actually listen to you and show up to class. The ultimate goal of this minigame is to train up each student within a 50-turn window so that they can compete in Purgatory's underground tournament, where if they win, you'll get prize money to upgrade Sodachi's dojo and can afford better training regimens to make the work go by faster. Now, it should be noted, you have no control over your students once they're in a match, aside from a special move that you can tell them to perform in the middle of a fight. Although, you should be aware that the special move isn't free, as not only do you have to build it up by mashing the X button, but if it doesn't take out the opponent, it will cause your trust with your student to take a hit. But, with that being said, don't be shy about using it, as if they're in a pinch, it could be a good way of turning around momentum. Or it couldn't. Again, you don't have control over your students, so whatever happens, happens. Now, while I find the dojo to be a fine inclusion, albeit a bit draining by the time I got to the 4th student, it wasn't so much the gameplay that caught my attention, but the music. As when you take your students out to a restaurant, the music in the background has a chance to play Sonic songs. I lit up like a firework when I heard Dreams of Absolution faintly play in the background. I was so floored to hear Sonic music playing that it honestly helped me get to the end of this minigame, as I wanted to hear how many more Sonic songs would be included in this section, and the answer is a good handful. You got songs like the aforementioned Dreams of Absolution, Ride Through Gravity, I think Night of the Wind plays, or I might just be going crazy. Maybe I'm marking out a little too hard considering that the Yakuza games are owned by Sega, so this isn't extremely out of left field. Hell, Sonic even makes a cameo in the arcade, so it was just a matter of time before something like this came into fruition. But it's still pretty jaw-dropping to see it finally happen. Now, I don't want it to sound like I'm throwing shade at this minigame, because I honestly did enjoy my time playing it. It's just that the Sonic music helped my motivation to finish it. It should be noted that this won't be the last time Yakuza games have Sonic music in them, as it will be sprinkled out in many other games in many different areas, and it never gets old to hear these songs appear when they do. On that note, let's move on to the music, because 4 has some really good bangers. Now, up to this point, I've always talked about how good Yakuza's music is, but 4 is the first time where people around me noticed how good it was, to the point where they were shocked I was playing a beat 'em up with these kinds of tunes. One song in particular that caught their attention was Whiskey and Rhapsody, and personally, I don't blame them, because this song is incredibly smooth, mysterious, and chaotic all at the same time. For this song, I really gotta give it up to the trumpet player, because that person's insertions make the song so much more punchier and fun to listen to as a whole. Onto the more combat-focused tracks, all of the character battle themes are great, but Akiyama's theme Speedstar manages to eke it out over the others thanks to the amazing piano piece about 47 seconds in that is just so hard not to jam out to. But with that being said, I'd love to give an honorable mention to Tanimura's theme, Broken Police Radio, as its opening riff is fantastic. Anyways, to go back to revamps for a second, something I failed to mention is IF7, as Doc Brown has returned with a new version of it called IF7R. While the basic function is still the same from 3, 4 steps it up a bit by allowing you to fight the other protagonists in the game. Sadly, at the time of writing this is the closest thing we'll ever get to a Yakuza PvP game, which may be for the best because, man, Kiryu is the least fun thing to fight in the game. An AI with Tiger Jaw is genuinely frightening, and as a result, it forces you to approach the fight in a very specific way with each character. Otherwise, you'll die. Still, I do wish that a Yakuza character could make an appearance in a fighting game like Tekken, but as long as none of the characters are okay with hitting women, that'll just never happen. I mean, it could have happened, as Tanimura is shown to be fine sparring with women, but with things turning out the way they did behind the scenes, I'm not gonna hold my breath. I don't want to go too much into detail on this, but you may notice that the thumbnail for this video and the character that appears in the game aren't the same at all. Well, that's because the original face for Tanimura was modeled after a real-life actor, Hiroki Naramiya. To make a long story short, Naramiya got caught in a cocaine case that was later proven to be a false accusation. However, because doing drugs is a big crime in Japan, a bunch of businesses distanced themselves from him, including Sega. The lack of face showed toward Naramiya caused him to give up his career on the silver screen, and unsurprisingly, when the time came to use his likeness for the remaster, and I'm assuming on this part, he said no, causing Sega to have to find a new face actor for Tanimura. Now, to be honest, I actually prefer Tanimura's new face modeled after Toshiki Masuda, as I think his looks fit the world of Yakuza a lot better, but it still sucks that this happened to Naramiya, and for what it's worth, I do hope that he's doing well in whatever industry he finds himself in now. How with that all being said, I'm all out of stuff to cover gameplay wise, so let's not waste any more time and wrap up the story as well, shall we? So, going back to where I last left off about Majima messing up in 85, as it turns out, he and Saejima used to be sworn brothers, with Lily, or rather Yasuko, being Saejima's little sister. The three of them seemed to have a nice friendship going on in Osaka for a while. That is until one day when Saejima got a hit request for the leader of the Ueno Seiwa. Now, this hit wasn't so much to settle a rivalry, but a ploy to rocket Saejima's boss aside to the top of the Tojo ladder by eliminating a thorn in the clan's side. It should be noted that this was supposed to be a two-man job. However, when the day came, Majima was nowhere to be found, leaving Saejima to take on 20 men alone and somehow managing to do it. 25 years later, Saejima is seen as a Tojo clan legend for managing to take down 18 men by himself. But the glory came at the cost of his freedom, as now he is a death row convict whose execution date is slowly approaching. Strangely enough, just before Saejima's execution date, he's transferred to another prison named Okinawa Penitentiary No. 2, which at first doesn't faze him. That is until he meets a handful of Ueno Seiwa members in said penitentiary looking to get revenge on what went down in 85. While the prisoners prove to be a joke to Saejima, the warden turns out to be a bit more than he expected, beating Saejima to his hands and knees. Luckily, this beatdown is called off early, when the warden gets pulled to the side by a shady guard who was paid off by Hamazaki. Yeah, that asshole that stabbed Kiryu at the end of 3 is back, but after getting arrested, Hamazaki seems to have mellowed out a bit, being a bit more calm than his incarnation in 3, although that might have something to do with his new living arrangements and their strict residency rules. To make a long story short, Hamazaki tells Saejima that Okinawa Penitentiary No. 2 doesn't officially exist on the books, being in actuality a nameless correctional facility. This little detail allows a lot of things the penitentiary does to get swept under the rug, things like giving inmates an early grave, to which Hamazaki further comments on by saying that they always label deaths in this place under illnesses, not having the balls to stand up and admit their own faults. Hell, it's so bad here that Hamazaki even says that the room they're currently sitting in right now was used to beat some asshole to death recently. But just as the guards are corrupt enough to snuff out the lives of others on their own accord, as well as hire some of the prisoners to do crimes to make themselves look better when they arrest them, they are also corrupt enough to accept bribes from the prisoners, which is how Hamazaki managed to meet Saejima in the first place. With the information about Okinawa Penitentiary No. 2 out in the open, Hamazaki then moves on to what he's actually here for, being a prison break scheme that he needs Saejima's muscle for. And to give him the motivation to say yes, Hamazaki then tells him that he's actually failed his hit back in 85, as Ueno survived the assault and made a pact with the Tojo clan, becoming one of their allies. In addition, Sasai stepped down from his family, shouldering the blame for the attack, while the Shibata family managed to swoop in and get the prey Sasai was looking for, allowing them to climb the Tojo clan ladder. But the cherry on top of it all was Majima, who Hamazaki tells Saejima that his disappearance on that day was all according to plan. All this combined gets Saejima heated enough to sign on to Hamazaki's plan. On the way out, just before they leave, Hamazaki manages to pilfer a book from the warden's office, the book in question being a line of defense in case he runs into trouble with the cops down the road. Surprisingly, despite being two scumbags, they manage to form a brotherhood during their escape, but that doesn't last long as the warden ends up surprising Hamazaki on the way out, and to make sure he doesn't get Saejima, Hamazaki throws both himself and the warden into the ocean, with Saejima following suit shortly after. Before he jumped though, Hamazaki tells Saejima that when he gets to land to look for a man named Kiryu, saying that he'll help him get back to Kamurocho, and wouldn't you know it, Saejima just so happens to wash up on Morning Glory's shore. Of course, when Saejima comes to, he's got a lot to answer for, which he tries to play off as being a shipwrecked sailor, but unfortunately for him, not only did Kiryu recognize his prison jumpsuit, but he also did his homework, as while Saejima was unconscious, he went to the Coast Guard to see how the weather was last night, to which they said it was perfectly normal. Kiryu then tells Saejima that if he turns himself in, the cops might go easy on him, but Saejima tells Kiryu that he's a death row convict, so going back isn't an option. This gets Saejima to use force to convince him to change his mind, as he needs to see if what Hamazaki said was true. However, the fight ends prematurely thanks to Saejima's injuries, forcing Kiryu to drag him back inside. Before Saejima passes out, he mutters something about being unable to face Hamazaki like this, which gets Haruka to stop in her tracks as she flashes back to the end of 3. Kiryu on the other hand continues to help out Saejima, saying that, in the end, he isn't too different from himself given his past, and because of that, he's willing to help out any Yakuza, including Hamazaki, but only if he sincerely changed his ways. With that, Kiryu gives Saejima the money to make it to Kamurocho, as well as new clothes to make the trip in peace. Saejima doesn't question Kiryu's newfound generosity, as he makes a beeline to Kamurocho, and within minutes, makes friends with Kido in his search for information. Eventually though, Saejima manages to find LaFlores, who promises to help him find Sasai, only if he manages to win a Coliseum fight similar to Kiryu's condition back in the day. However, this particular fight is a death match, which, upon victory, the audience clamors for the opposition's blood, and Saejima just can't do it. He may have been able to kill those guys 25 years ago, but going behind bars gave him a lot of time to think about the lives he took and the families he took them from. Dwelling on the possibilities changed Saejima significantly, to the point where now he can't even think about taking a life, and with that, he calls out the members of the audience for being psychopaths for cheering for murder, and storms out of the ring. Saejima then gets ready to leave Purgatory, disgusted by the Florist's nonsense, but the Florist manages to pull Saejima into his office and tells him that he actually passed the test, as the Florist actually detests dealing with murderers, and if Saejima would have taken that man's life, he would have rejected him on the spot. The Florist then explains to Saejima that Sasai was in Purgatory the whole time, as after Saejima's stump back in 85, Ueno had put out a hit out on Sasai's head, but thanks to Majima, he was able to escape with his life. When Saejima finally sees Sasai, he looks like he's not all there, which gets Saejima to start tearing up, as the man he looked up to like a father is now mentally broken. But not all is lost, as Sasai manages to remember and barely eke out Saejima's name, which gets him to break down crying. Now with his first goal fulfilled, Saejima sets his sights on Majima, only to find that Majima had beaten him to the punch, as he sends his men in to give a violent invitation to meet with him in Millennium Tower. Saejima accepts, knowing that this will be the best chance he'll get to meet Majima. But before he goes, Kido asks him if he regrets killing those guys back in 85, to which Saejima says that he does. But he continues by saying that he would end up regretting going back on his word more than that. The question lets Saejima onto the fact that Kido was planning to do something for the higher-ups, and tells him that the only way to live life is balls out. Otherwise, you won't be able to live with yourself. After that, Saejima makes his way to Millennium Tower, where the Majima family are waiting to take him on, and after Saejima cleans their clocks, Majima descends from the tower to meet Saejima. However, he suggests that they take the reunion to their old stomping grounds, the batting cages, and so Majima has his remaining men part the streets of Kamurocho like the Red Sea, allowing Saejima to travel without worry. After arriving at the batting cages, Majima starts goofing off as per usual, but Saejima isn't having it, wanting answers as as to why he wasn't there on the day of the hit and why he ended up saving Sasai. Majima then reminds Saejima of the terms of their brotherhood, saying that any betrayal means death, prompting Saejima to start their fight. After coming at Majima like a freight train on legs, Majima begins talking, saying that back in 85, he was forcibly pulled to the side by Shibata, who told Majima that this hit was a setup by a traitor in the Ueno Seiwa, given how fortunate it is for their boss to be going to a cramped noodle shop as his first meal out from prison instead of a lavish party, and how the information just happened to cross Sasai's path. Shibata continues on by saying this is most likely done by a third party, wanting to start a war between Sasai and the Ueno so that they can swoop in and stop the war. And after showing how much swaying power they have over one of Tojo Clan's biggest rivals, they will then be able to rocket up through the ranks. So Shibata insists that Majima stay out of this, otherwise it may look bad for his patriarch. But Majima doesn't care, as he left Saejima hanging and tries to leave the warehouse to see if he can do something about the hit. However, that's when Shibata's men arrive to beat and capture Majima. Although, because Majima put up so much of a fight, the only conscious member of Shibata's forces takes the liberty of removing Majima's eye. From there, we cut to our next protagonist, Tanimura, as he's in the middle of being chewed out by Suguuchi, who's questioning why he was at the scene of the crime when the One Punk's body turned up earlier in the game. Tanimura ignores him, using his police radio to listen in on a horse race he has money on, which gets him yelled at even more. Knowing that their conversation isn't going much of anywhere, Suguuchi leaves Tanimura with a warning not to stick his nose where it doesn't belong, otherwise it will end him up in an early grave just like his father. Tanimura ignores that statement as well and takes note of Suguuchi's shoes before making his leave. As Tanimura goes out on patrol, and by patrol I mean heckling civilians who ratted him out for gambling on the job, he eventually, through his seedy connections, who he actively tries to make less seedy, would find Yasuko still in Kamurocho working at a different club despite getting the money from Akiyama. However, the Shibata have also caught on to Yasuko's location and take her to the docks for questioning, with Tanimura following suit. Once there, Tanimura loudly defeats the Shibata in an explosion, but somehow, despite that, manages to silently sneak into Shibata's office, where you see Shibata, Yasuko, and Arai. But that's not all, as Shibata offhandedly comments on a meeting he was going to have with Katsuragi being postponed thanks to an influx in activity in Kamurocho. That's right, all three of these assholes were working together from the very beginning, but as to why they're doing all of this, it's unfortunately unknown, as it happens to be the one thing they won't talk about. Shibata then moves the conversation onto Yasuko, saying that he wants to find out as to why she's killing all his men, as well as some other things. However, before Shibata can do anything, Arai guns him down right then and there, saying that he and Katsuragi were looking to cut off some dead weight from the fold, and considering that all he did was use his knowledge of the event to get favors out of Katsuragi, he was the ideal person to get rid of. Before Arai can deal the final blow, Tanimura bursts into the room, to which Arai, surprisingly, notices him and flees the scene. However, the damage he did to Shibata proved to be enough as he dies on the floor. But despite that, he still has his original target Yasuko, who can give him some answers. To make another long story short, back in 85, Tanimura's father was the lead detective on Saejima's case, but mysteriously ended up dead when he approached Yasuko with news that he found evidence to prove her brother's innocence. Though, despite Tanimura's dad being dead, Yasuko didn't give up hope about getting Saejima out of jail, which is why when she got a call from another cop 25 years after the fact telling her that there's another way to get her brother out, she didn't think twice and went to go meet the cop only to find Katsuragi. Despite the deception, Katsuragi does promise to give his eyewitness testimony saying that Saejima didn't kill anyone. However, in order to get him to appear in front of a judge, Yasuko had to scratch his back first, either by killing people he requests of her, or by her giving him 1,000,000 yen, and considering how she didn't have the money on hand, Yasuko went for the more hands-on approach, until she met Akiyama. Tanimura then deduces that the sudden shift in a 25-year standstill mean that someone other than Katsuragi is giving the orders, and has recently gotten scared of how many people know their secret. However, in the middle of his analysis, Yasuko decides to give the money to Tanimura, seeing as now it's too late to save Saejima as his execution is just days away, and now she just wants to see if she'll be able to finally visit him without being shooed away by the guards. With that, Tanimura is now in possession of the 1,000,000 yen, and thanks to some meddling done by the floors, he gets into contact with Katsuragi, the two managing to agree to meet in front of Millennium Tower to make an exchange of the money for information on what went down in 85. When the two meet up, Katsuragi doesn't hesitate to tell Tanimura most of what went down thanks to the statute of limitations wearing off, saying that on that day he had full control over how many men Saejima would kill without having to wear a bulletproof vest. Tanimura then diverts the conversation to his dad, asking what happened to him, to which Katsuragi tells him that thanks to an inside man, they were able to bury him alongside the evidence. Katsuragi's story managed to capture Tanimura hook, line, and sinker, as without him noticing, the once bustling streets of Kamurocho grew silent as the Ueno Seiwa surrounded him. Katsuragi asked for the money, causing Tanimura to flip the script and say that he'll only give him the money if he promises to stay away from Yasuko. Unfortunately, he also ended up saying that she was going down to Okinawa, which gave Katsuragi enough information for him to make his leave, as his lackeys deal with Tanimura and the million yen. But just when it seems that Tanimura will have to do this alone, Suguuchi appears out of nowhere to give him a helping hand. After beating the Ueno Seiwa back, Tanimura returns to Little China where the Chief of Public Safety is waiting for him. When Tanimura asks if he was aware of any corruption going on in the force, the chief responds by saying that back then he was incredibly low on the totem pole, so any kind of corruption would have flown over his head. Tanimura then decides to put the chief to use by having him grant him access to the record room to get more information from the police's perspective. And wouldn't you know, Tanimura finds out that there were actually two detectives on the case back in '85, one being his father and the other being Suguuchi. With that invaluable piece of information, Tanimura heads down to Sky Finance to return the 100 million yen so that Yasuko doesn't rack up a huge debt. However, when he gets there, Akiyama states that the money is loan-free, and that it's the only thing linking him and Yasuko together, so he hopes that her need to return the money will eventually lead them to meeting each other in the future. Their conversation is then cut short by Kido, who calls Akiyama telling him that he found the other thug from the bar incident earlier in the game named Mishima, who was requesting police protection in exchange for his testimony. Akiyama suggests that Tanimura take the case, seeing as he feels that the current case today and the shooting back in '85 are connected, but Tanimura takes Akiyama's idea a step beyond by calling in their meeting so that he can hopefully catch Katsuragi's helper trying to tie up any loose ends. When Tanimura arrives to protect Mishima, he begins explaining why he and his friends were at the Kanemura family club earlier in the game, saying that Katsuragi had ordered them to go down there and make some noise for reasons that were never explained to them. And to top that off, after Mishima had recovered from Akiyama's attack, he booked it back to Ueno HQ where he overheard Katsuragi talking about the lieutenant's death being all according to plan, and that Mishima will be taken care of next. After divulging all of that information, the helper predictably wastes no time in plugging the hole, shooting Mishima within the darkness, until the light reveals Katsuragi's helper to be Suguuchi, who Tanimura isn't surprised to see. Not only thanks to his little hero stunt back in Kamurocho Theater, where somehow he heard about the attack going on despite no one telling him, but also because he always wears expensive looking clothing, which is unaffordable with a cop's salary. After Tanimura explains his deduction, then part 2 of his plan reveals itself as a swarm of cops pour into the house to arrest Suguuchi. However, because of Japanese law saying that the cops are not allowed to shoot their guns, Suguuchi is getting ready to walk right out of there. Never mind the fact that any one of these cops could try to approach Suguuchi and detain him physically, but I digress. Tanimura then shoots a warning shot at Suguuchi, not wanting to let a criminal who all but admitted to his crime to get out scot-free. Surprised by his forwardness, Suguuchi ends up praising Tanimura, saying that he's the only cop in here worth his badge. However, despite the nice words, Suguuchi tries to run for it, resulting in a high-speed boat chase and an eventual fight when Tanimura catches up to him. And after beating the hell out of him, Suguuchi then comes clean, saying that he was the man who killed Tanimura's father back in '85, so that he could help Katsuragi's plan go off without a hitch. Why would Suguuchi do that? Well, it's because he's been a Yakuza from the very beginning who masqueraded as a cop to give Katsuragi, his sworn brother, some help from the inside. But when push came to shove, Suguuchi proved to be ineffective thanks to Katsuragi's blunder during the shooting in '85, causing Deputy Chief Murakata to get involved, who surprisingly didn't call him out on this, but ordered him to bring him to Katsuragi if he didn't want word to get out. Tanimura is baffled at the fact that the chain of corruption goes straight up to the number 2 spot in the police. However, Suguuchi tries to focus the conversation back onto himself, telling Tanimura that he's way out of his element in going after Munakata and should be happy to have caught his father's murderer. But Tanimura refuses to let it go, saying that finding the truth about his father is the whole reason he became a cop in the first place, so backing out now is not an option. Despite trying to deter Tanimura, Suguuchi takes a lot of joy in finally being able to come clean about the truth, saying that he's been living a lie for the past 30 years, being a lap lapdog for both the police and Yakuza. Suguchi then continues on by saying watching Tanimura struggle and succeed in finding the truth makes him wish that he went straight sooner. Just as he says that, a bullet hits Suguchi from the shadows as the assailant makes his leave in a speedboat. Instead of giving chase, Tanimura looks after Suguchi as he fades, who is surprisingly happy to be dying as now he'll finally be able to get some peace from the 30 years of chaos he lived. And he's not alone, as the assailant that took him out, the chief of public safety, makes a call to Munakata, telling him he's killed both Suguchi and Tanimura before taking his own life. The chief told this lie as a way of getting Tanimura a fighting chance to go up against Munakata, as with Suguchi spilling the beans, it was only a matter of time before he came after him. The next day, Tanimura gets a surprise visit from Akiyama, who ended up getting kicked out of his office due to suspicion of coercion thanks to his test that he does before he gives people loans. With Akiyama having no better place to go, the two brainstorm of how they're going to take down their common foe. Meanwhile in Okinawa, Hamazaki washes up on Morning Glory all banged up thanks to the waves, causing Kiryu to have to take him in and patch him up. During the nursing process, Hamazaki asks if Saejima passed through recently, to which when Kiryu responds yes, Hamazaki asks him to go to Kamurocho to tell him the truth about Majima and the shooting in 85. Kiryu questions why he just doesn't go himself, which gets Hamazaki to reveal the book he pilfered from the warden's office, which inside lists a number of transactions going in and out of Okinawa Penitentiary number 2, including one made by Jingu for over 10 million yen. However, as important as this revelation is, it's what comes next that makes this scene one of my favorites in the game, as Hamazaki begins flipping through the book to reveal a plan the police have cooked up to dismantle the Tojo clan, destroying everything they worked up to build. The next day, as Kiryu's kids come home from a school trip, he announces that he'll be leaving for Kamurocho. As I mentioned in 3, Kiryu cares about if the Tojo clan can stand on its own without him leading it, so it makes perfect sense why, even though nothing is threatening him directly, that he drops everything in order to fix the situation. Naturally, there's a lot of hesitation due to the information coming from Hamazaki, most of it coming from Haruka, who understandably isn't over the stabbing from 3. As such, Hamazaki decides to back off and turn himself in so that Haruka doesn't get a heart attack by staring at him. But things get out of control quickly when Kiryu and Hamazaki run into Yasuko at the police station, who when they hear her mention Saejima, they pull her to the side to explain that he's no longer in Okinawa, and while they're doing this, the guards from Okinawa Penitentiary number 2 arrive to capture her. After fending them off, Hamazaki stays behind to buy Kiryu and Yasuko some time so that they can run to Kamurocho, but just as they leave the room, Hamazaki doubles over from a back injury, leaving him sprawled out on the floor. As the two make it to Kamurocho, Kiryu hides Yasuko in New Serena, seeing as they're now in the heart of the chaos where people are actively looking for her. After seeing Date, who is now temporarily running New Serena while the mama is out of town, Kiryu asks Yasuko why she's so dead set on saving Saejima, which gets Yasuko to divulge her life story. Long story short, when Yasuko was young, she was a sickly kid who needed a kidney transplant. However, thanks to her mother dying along with Saejima being her stepbrother, she couldn't find a donor close by. So Saejima approached his father, who not only abandoned them, but also became a Yakuza. And just like any Yakuza, he tried to extort them the moment they asked, giving a 14-year-old Saejima a quote for 30 million yen to get him to give up his liver. As such, this sent Saejima into a spree of thuggery, beating up random people on the street and taking their pocket change to hopefully build the 30 million yen. That is until Sasai stepped into the scene, who told Saejima that he'd give him the 30 million yen only if he swore up and became a Yakuza, to which Saejima did in a heartbeat to save his sister. Yasuko states that she doesn't care whether or not Saejima killed those guys back in 85, as no matter what, Saejima is still her brother. But Kiryu manages to deduce from that statement that Saejima is not just her brother, but her whole reason for living, and believes that if she were to find him dead, she wouldn't be able to go on living herself, to which Yasuko doesn't challenge him. With that, Kiryu asks Date to keep an eye on her as he heads out and finds Majima getting arrested by the cops. When Kiryu asks what happened, Majima states that Daigo sold him out, and continues on by saying the shooting in 85, Jingu's 10 million yen, and what's currently happening in the Tojo clan today are all connected, and it's up to him to stop whatever's going down. From there, we cut to Tojo HQ, where Munakata is having a chat with Daigo, who is completely dumbfounded to find that the police had a role to play during the events of Yakuza Kiwami, and are behind the shooting from earlier in 4. Munakata then states that the police and Yakuza are two halves of the same coin, administering their own forms of justice. However, thanks to the last couple of games, the Yakuza have become a lot more public with their actions while the police stood in the background unable to interact with them. Because of this, Munakata yearns for the way things used to be and plans on changing things back to the natural order as he reveals part 2 of his plan to Daigo, as thanks to his cooperation on getting Majima arrested, he wants him to now appoint Arai to the spot of captain, allowing the police to control the Tojo clan from the inside, and in return for this, Munakata ensures Daigo of the complete erasure of the Ueno Seiwa. Daigo questions if it will be that easy, since Katsuragi isn't the type to sit around and wait for his destruction, which gets Munakata to consider the possible countermeasures Katsuragi could be cooking up. As we cut away from that scene, Kiryu makes his way back to New Serena, where he finds Date passed out on the floor, and after waking him up, Date tells Kiryu that he was drugged by Yasuko, who went out to look for Saejima. It doesn't take long for Kiryu to find her running alongside Akiyama and Tanimura, who heard a rumor that Saejima was staying inside Purgatory and were leading the way for her until Kiryu started following them. Kiryu's sudden presence gets Akiyama and Tanimura to split up from Yasuko so that they can take care of things, but just before she leaves, Tanimura gives her his pistol just in case she needs to use it. Thanks to Kiryu looking like a Yakuza, Akiyama and Tanimura decide not to listen to him when he says he's trying to protect Yasuko, leading the three of them to throw down in the sewers with Kiryu coming out the victor. When Kiryu gets to Purgatory, he finds the floor sprawled out on the floor as Akiyama and Tanimura hobble in behind him. As they ask what happened, the florist tells him that Katsuragi and Kido barged in with an army of men, kidnapping Saejima and Yasuko. It should also be noted that during the process of capturing Saejima while he's acting like a tough guy, Katsuragi gets sick of his attitude and reveals to him that he didn't kill anyone in 85. And then when Saejima had fled the scene, Katsuragi got up and shot 18 of his own men in the head to make sure that they were all dead. This was Katsuragi's aforementioned blunder that got Munakata onto him in the first place, as his accuracy with the shots made it all the more questionable why he was still alive. But more importantly than that, this is one of 4's biggest eyebrow-raising moments for Saejima, as somehow he didn't notice that none of the 20 guys he shot were bleeding. Now, to some extent, I can look past this and conjure up some headcanon to make this scene work. In fact, I already did, as in my mind, I like to think that thanks to a mix of adrenaline and this being his first quote-unquote killing, he wasn't looking as closely at his targets, and due to there being so many of them, he had to split up his attention. So when ramen bowls started flying, he confused the broth with blood, which by the way, Saejima's fight in the ramen shop is a masterfully done scene, as it does a pretty good job of hiding the truth in plain sight, but also making it possible for the more keen-eyed viewers to catch on to the big reveal beforehand. But in saying that, this doesn't mean that I like the explanation, as Saejima's biggest character moment was about the guilt he felt for the atrocity caused in 85, and from that guilt, I initially thought we got a really well-told story of how crime doesn't pay, and even though it helped him in the moment, the consequences eventually caught up to him to render all his sacrifices moot. But with this new information that we now know, Saejima's hands aren't as dirty as we once thought, and the meaning behind his tale becomes muddied as a whole. I mean, it could still be about how crime doesn't pay, but with the onus no longer falling on Saejima for the death of those 18 men, his biggest character moment now falls flat because we know he didn't do it. That's not to say that Saejima can't feel responsible, seeing as it was thanks to him that Katsuragi was allowed to kill them in the first place, but that's a whole different kind of guilt than being the primary reason those guys can't go home to their families. At first, I couldn't fathom why the writers did this to Saejima, but after mulling over the question for a while, I think I finally get it. The writers didn't want Saejima to become Kiryu. I mean, when you take a step back and look at all of the writing that has been surrounding Saejima, there seems to be only one direction the game is pushing him towards, and that's out of the Tojo clan. But in doing so, you'd be retreading on Kiryu's development, as thanks to losing all his friends, he already left the clan. By taking away the onus on Saejima when it came to the 85 fiasco, he actually has a much more positive outlook on the Tojo clan as a whole, or at least much more positive than Kiryu, as he managed to benefit from being a Yakuza in saving his sister and also getting a new father figure, which would also help justify him sticking around in the clan in future titles. I couldn't even begin to tell you how good or bad a character Saejima would have been if he was still responsible for 85. But I do agree that having two characters with very similar ideals, background, and development isn't very fun to follow. But I digress. Feeling defeated, the three of them decide to lick their wounds at New Serena, where Akiyama gets to see the damage the DA caused to his office, as he managed to find and clean out his secret safe of billions of yen he kept hidden inside of it. Akiyama deduces that the DA was a fraud and that all of this was Kito's doing, seeing as he was the only one from the villain side who visited his office frequently, and assume he came across his secret safe by poking his nose in when neither he nor Hana was there. It's a low moment for everyone, but that's when Kiryu brings up the book of receipts Hamazaki gave him and decides to use it as leverage to bring Katsuragi to the bargaining table, since he's the only other character they can contact thanks to Tanimura calling him earlier in the story. To say the negotiations went rough would be par for the course actually, as Kiryu made a deal with Katsuragi to meet on top of Kamurocho Hills, only after Kiryu fought his way through the entirety of the Uenosewa clan alone, as Katsuragi wants to make sure that Kiryu is too tired to maul him when he gets to the top.
Oh no! Anyway, last week...
The best part about all of this is that Kiryu isn't even breathing heavy by the time he reaches the top of Kamurocho Hills. Regardless, Kiryu jumped through the hoops Katsuragi set up for him, and now the deal can finally go down, as Kito trades Yasuko over for the book, with Saejima following suit only after the book is confirmed to be real. Or so they think, as the moment Kito turns his back, he pulls out a gun on the two, only to then make a 180-degree spin and light up Katsuragi instead. Kito then decides to taunt Katsuragi by saying that he isn't the kind of man to betray his sworn brother, revealing that Arai was there the whole time. However, while Kito says he never betrayed Arai, Arai doesn't feel the same way, as he shoots Kito and lets him ride down the elevator. Kiryu gets particularly heated at Arai's actions, telling him that there's nothing more disgraceful than betraying your sworn brother. Arai doesn't care for Kiryu's remarks, deciding to leave on that note, but Kiryu tells him right before he disappears that the Tojo clan will never be his, which gets Arai to retort by saying that he's too late, and because he's always too late, stuff like this happens. With that, Arai leaves, and with him gone, Yasuko rushes over to free Saejima, who then makes a beeline to Katsuragi, noticing that he didn't bleed out when Kito shot him, and as he suspected, Katsuragi was wearing a bulletproof vest. I'm honestly surprised he didn't replace Kito's gun with rubber bullets too. Katsuragi then backhandedly comments Saejima, saying that he's not as dumb as he used to be, which gets Saejima riled up, but decides against attacking him, saying that he's not worth it. Katsuragi, however, doesn't see it from his perspective, as he takes advantage of Saejima's moment to shoot at him twice. One of the bullets manages to land in Saejima's arm, while Yasuko protects him for the second bullet, taking it in the back. What follows next is the coolest and saddest scene in 4, as Yasuko no-sells the damage and slowly walks over to Katsuragi, who manages to miss all of his remaining shots, as Yasuko takes out Tanimura's gun and aims it at Katsuragi. But just before she shoots, she tells Saejima that even if it was for a day, she's glad to have finally seen him again, and wants to repay him for everything he's done for her by keeping his hand clean as she deals with Katsuragi, putting a bullet right in his forehead. Shortly after killing Katsuragi, Yasuko's legs give way as Saejima rushes to her side, where she apologizes to him before passing on. To me, this is where the game ends, as without Katsuragi, the story loses a lot of steam fast. The problem here is actually very similar to 3, where the real villains of the game get barely any screen time, as Katsuragi basically kept it all to himself. And as a result, I actually think the game would have worked a bit better if he was the final villain you took down instead of the first of many. Not only did Katsuragi kickstart this whole event, but he's connected to all 4 protagonists, has caused all of them direct grief by his actions in the story, and in general, he's just a fun villain to watch bounce off the protagonist. While he's not the most complex villain, I don't think he needed to be, as in the past we've had characters like Ryuji who were pretty straightforward, but because of that managed to be a standout character amongst his ilk. Maybe that's easier for me to say now in retrospect, as with all the callbacks to Yakuza 1, the writers may have felt some kind of way to make the story bigger than its predecessor. But honestly, I was just enjoying how things were unfolding up to this point. At most, as far as the villains go, I think Munakata is the only character that really needs to be here to explain Katsuragi's connection with the police. The other 3 villains didn't necessarily have to be major villains, as they could have played support and could have been handled before Katsuragi, but I digress. At Police HQ, Arai arrives to give Munakata the receipt book he took from Kito. But Munakata berates him, saying that he should have used his police force to take the 100 billion yen that was just lying there, as without that untraceable money, it'll be hard to start up a new underground organization. With that being said, Munakata then tasks Arai with kidnapping the kids of Morning Glory to bring Kiryu to the negotiation table, handing him a gun just in case. Arai then takes the gun and shoots Munakata, saying that as a cop, there's a certain code he needs to uphold. Meanwhile at Serena, everyone tries to cope with the loss of Yasuko. Saejima of course taking it the hardest, going up to the roof to get some air. But while he does that, Kiryu gets a call from Haruka telling him that Hamazaki just passed away from his injuries, but left a message for him and Saejima telling them to protect the clan and preserve the fact that they existed. As Kiryu goes on to relay the message to Saejima, he also adds in his own 2 cents, saying that he finally realized after years of running from his fate that their lives aren't meant for themselves, as there will always be someone new to protect, which keeps them fighting. And now that he's realized this, he's done running and accepts the hand that fate dealt him. After that nice speech, Akiyama and Tanimura join them, saying that they all have unfinished business to take care of. As the four head back down to New Serena, Akiyama hatches up a plan to use this 100 billion yen by placing it on top of Millennium Tower and advertising its location to all their enemies to see who bites. It's an incredibly simple plan, but seeing as no one else has a better idea, they all go for it, forming a team in the process. And after having a last minute service for Yasuko, the four of them make their way to Millennium Tower to see how many flies they caught with their honey. As it turns out, they caught a whole horde of bugs in the form of Kido, Arai, and Daigo. Wait, what? Okay, so Arai explains that Kido was actually Daigo's errand boy the whole time, hoping to use him to bait Katsuragi into making big moves to distance himself from Munakata, which would bring Kiryu right to his doorstep. It was one hell of a plan to get the Ueno Seiwa off his back, but this plan quickly backfired when Yasuko died, giving both Kiryu and Saejima a reason to stick around in Kamurocho to find who was behind all of this. Arai explaining that he found all this out when Kido came to him telling him that they can use the 100 million yen to help out Munakata, which at that point, Arai never revealed to Kido that he was working alongside Munakata. Only someone on the inside who knew of that partnership could have told him that, and that person is obviously Daigo. After that explanation, Arai gets up on his high horse to talk about how Daigo betrayed the clan by sending Majima to jail and such, but even though he's right, I can't help but feel sympathetic to Daigo. You see, ever since the series began, the Tojo clan has been eating itself alive with him getting ownership of it at the end of Kiwami 2, where at that point, it was the equivalent of a rustic car with no wheels that Daigo was told to drive. Quite frankly, it is amazing the clan didn't capsize long before he took the helm of it, but at the end of 3, the engine of the car commits suicide and Daigo can't pretend that the car works anymore, and now he needs to make moves to make sure he can get off the highway and pay his 30,000 men the money they need to sustain themselves. By no means am I saying that it was a good decision to let Majima go to jail, but what was he supposed to do, especially when the Ueno Seiwa were knocking on his door threatening to take the clan's last hope away from them? This is why I don't think Daigo should be treated as one of the main villains of 4. Should he be dealt with? Sure, because his actions led to the death of Yasuko, but I just don't think he should be up here amongst the people who have making characters' lives hell for 25 years. And hell, Kido too for that matter, albeit to a lesser extent because he doesn't have 2 games of history behind him. And with that being said, on the other side of this conversation is Arai, who I don't care for in the slightest. He has the same problem as Joji from 3, where he is the main stinger and nothing else. Now, to be fair to Arai, he has more defined traits than Joji, as his dialogue paints him as an undercover cop that got accustomed to the Yakuza life. However, we only learn about this right here, right before the final bosses start, getting no time to be elaborated on or developed in the slightest as to why he became this way, so it comes off as extremely last minute. Anyways, Arai tries to tell Daigo that he's better than him because he killed Munakata instead of living under his thumb, but guess what? Munakata's got something to say about that, as he demonstrates to Arai firsthand how he survived, as it turns out the gun he gave him was also filled with rubber bullets. Even though I tried to defend Saejima's problem earlier, this one takes the cake, as despite knowing of rubber bullets and shooting Munakata in the head in a near empty room, Arai somehow didn't notice the fact that no blood came out of his target, meaning that Arai had to have become temporarily blind after shooting Munakata and got his eyesight back after stumbling out of the room. Regardless of what happened back then, Munakata now has the upper hand, using the police to surround the 3 thugs as he gets ready to pilfer the 100 million yen. But just then, the 4 heroes come down via helicopters, scattering the bills to the streets below, similar to how Nishikiyama did 5 years ago. And without missing a beat, the 4 go on to take the villain that corresponds to their story. So Akiyama takes on Arai, Saejima fights Kido, Kiryu mauls Daigo, and Tanimura goes up against Munakata. and friends. It should be noted that Munakata is the final boss in 4, and his fight in particular is a reference to that terrible Jingu fight from the original game, where Munakata stands in the back and pelts you with bullets, while his lackeys do nothing but dodge your every attack until you go after Munakata, while they're beat down in your ass relentlessly. All of this back to back is the reason why I say 4 is great up until it ends, as even with the whole rubber bullet fiasco, I would have been okay with it if the writers didn't try to double down on it like it was the coolest thing in the world. Still though, it all manages to wrap up smoothly, as once all 4 of them are done with their fights, Tanimura keeps his focus on Munakata as he takes out his pistol and fires a handful of warning shots at him. That is until Arai tells him to put the gun down and let Munakata rot behind bars for his crimes, as dying now would be the easy way for him to go. But in hearing that, Munakata gets confident that his position in the police will allow him to sweep all of this under the rug. That is until Akiyama gives a signal for Date and Sudo to fly in via helicopter and dump early editions of Date's article detailing all of Munakata's crimes thanks to the receipt book, which Kiryu had Date look at off screen, to the public who were still collecting money at Millennium Tower's base. With Munakata having no more smart answers, oh no! Please be a rubber bullet, please be a rubber bullet, please be a rubber bullet, please be a... Oh, thank God! Oh, thank God! Woo! Pretend I never said that. After losing any possible recourse to get himself out of the situation, Munakata then takes the gun and uses it to shoot himself so he can avoid the fall. With Munakata dead and both Kido and Arai arrested, the story winds to a close as our heroes go about their lives before all this started. As Hana comes back to Sky Finance looking a lot slimmer, and of course, Akiyama being the great friend that he is, no-sells everything she just said and tells her that he's been storing snacks waiting for a return, which Hana devours in a heartbeat. As for Tanimura and Date, they both have gone back to the police, with the former realizing that he can be the good in a corrupt and terrible system, while the other got bored of being a reporter. And finally for Kiryu and Saejima, they both head back to the Tojo clan to help Daigo and the recently released Majima rebuild what's left, all the while welcoming Saejima back to the clan and kickstarting the brand new Saejima family. And that was Yakuza 4, which honestly, despite the ending, is a really damn good game. I love the gameplay of 4 and how it not only tried to fix 3's problem with red heat, but how it also greatly expanded the combat to 3 new characters, all of whom feel great to control. I also just like the new characters in general. The story is unquestionably at its best when it focuses on their characters and the eventual bond they form. I am perfectly down to rock with these characters in another story, if they appear in another story. Well, no matter, 4 is still a great game, and honestly one of the best experiences I've had with a Yakuza game. I don't mean to downplay the other games as they're all great regardless, but 4 is just so much more enjoyable thanks to its cast of characters and new gameplay styles that it introduces, which make it all extremely easy to replay, as they all have different goals they're trying to achieve in combat, which breaks up the monotony. All in all, Yakuza 4 is a great game, and one that I love to return to just for the hell of it. And if you have it, which I don't understand why you haven't if you're watching this video, you should too. It ain't the best, but it's a definite standout against its amazing ilk.